So thank you, Simon. Thank you for having me. Let's get started with keeping up with your Power BI tenant administration. It is a topic that has a lot of things to cover about. It is a topic that I can't tell everything about in these 45 minutes that I have with you. So myself, my name is Benni De Jagere, as I briefly mentioned before, and as Simon mentioned as well during the introduction. And sometimes when I do have some spare time, I am one of the co-leaders for datamines.be, which is a data and AI user group in Belgium, and we do all sorts of stuff. If you want to find me on any of the social channels, you can find me on Twitter, on LinkedIn, Sessionize, etc. As Simon also mentioned, I am a data platform MVP, which means I focus a bit on things like Power BI, but also more of the enterprise data stuff as well on the other side of the spectrum. That said, let's dive in. Tenant admins, the ones that I usually encounter, they're mostly appointed by some sort of accident. So they are something that I like to call an accidental tenant admin, meaning that they didn't get out of bed in the morning and said, today I am going to be a Power BI tenant administrator. It is also the fact that usually a dedicated Power BI admin is something that is not always that common. They usually have some other hats to wear, like being a database administrator or a global administrator for Office 365. And it is something that you pretty much rarely see unless you're working with the bigger corporations that have a very, very high workload on Power BI itself. Most of the tenant admins that I run into, they're actually appointed by association. So as I mentioned, accidental tenant admins, and it is when they're saying like, well, you're the one doing the SQL things, or you're the one doing Tableau or reporting services. So you're the Power BI admin as of now, which means that Power BI in the early beginnings of the product, right now it's about 5 years old, which means that in the early beginnings of the product, a lot of the things we tried to do were based on trial and edit. There wasn't a lot of documentation on all of the things that we were trying to do. And well, the product had to mature itself as well. But over the course of these 5 years, we've noticed that the maturity in both community resources, Microsoft's resources, and the enterprises and clients that we see, that the maturity has risen exponentially as well, which is a really good thing. We're getting better at it. The third thing is Power BI is a moving target, meaning things keep popping up pretty much on a weekly basis. You've got updates coming to desktop, to the service, to the APIs, to Power BI Report Builder. There's updates coming out every single week. So it is impossible to keep up to date with all of these different things. And I often get people telling me to say that, well, Power BI is just a data visualization tool. What's the big fuzz about it? Then the one thing that I do actually show them is this little diagram. And it is intended mainly at being overwhelming in this PowerPoint right now, but it is something that is created by Melissa Coates, who's an MVP from the United States, and she has this thing called the Power BI end-to-end diagram, which means she lays out every single component that is related to the Power BI ecosystem. The thing is, this was designed on January 4th, and it is already outdated. So Melissa is working on a new version. It's going to come up anytime soon, but that means there's going to be even more things added to this diagram. So that means that Power BI is a very, very extensive tool. Thus, moving target is grossly understating it. But what does a tenant admin actually do? And the thing is that I often when I talk to end users, they just say, well, admins, they just say no to everything. They just ignore all requests and they say no. Well, it is not necessarily the case, because in my opinion, a tenant admin should strive forward to empower and enable a data culture in an organization. They need to enable users so that they can actually use that data and build awesome things with it. Because if it's those end users building awesome things with it, the organization as a whole will move forward for the better. So it is not simply the process of restricting and disabling features, but it is making sure that if they restrict something or if they disable something, it has to mean that policies and processes and people need to be in place to handle incoming requests and to make sure that everyone can do their thing, that they can keep working on those awesome data projects, because that is the key. Meaning, a tenant admin should strive to empower and enable data culture in the organization, but they cannot do it alone. It is a team effort, and that is the least you can say about this. It has to be an organizational thing to move forward. But what does a tenant admin actually do? Well, in my opinion, they do nothing short of pure magic. So magic, that is the thing that I think tenant admins do, because they have a lot of hats to wear, they have a lot of things to do, and they have a lot of things to keep in mind. So some of the things that tenant admins should be doing is, well, they have to look for data management, for data governance, for security and compliance. They have to make sure that data is in place. They make sure that the data is there, that the data can be there, and that people that need to access that data can actually access the data. They need to do change management. What if a new feature rolls out? What if Microsoft decides to change the user interface for Power BI again for the second time in a year? These are all features that need to be introduced and that need to be handled properly for changes in the organization. Desktop as well is one of the most important features of change management. A new version rolls out every month, and every month has so many of these good new features that end users pretty much want to start using them as soon as possible. They have to integrate with different products as well. They have to make sure that if there's, for instance, something like Tableau that needs to use Power BI datasets through the XML endpoint, they have to set up these integrations with other products. If, for instance, they need to be looking at a data catalog solution like Colibra or Atacama or Azure Purview, they have to set up these integrations as well, or at least talk to different people on how to do it. But also, tenant admins usually are also a glorified help desk for Power BI questions. People come with questions to tenant admins for a lot of different things. And maybe that's also one of the reasons why people think that they just say no to everything, because they get overwhelmed with so many questions. So I think that most importantly, tenant admins do magic, period. So if someone comes up to me and says, well, Benny, I have an issue with, let's say something with data flows, for instance, my first reflex is to go look at what actually is the service health, meaning, are there any issues with Power BI or any Azure components, so that I can exclude this and then go further down the chain to look at different things that I may need to be looking into. So to make sure that I can actually see if there are issues with service health, I have three main things that I can look at. First one being the Power BI service, the Power BI support page, because the Power BI support page is the main go-to aspect to see if there is any issues on the Power BI service itself, because they log if there is degradations or plain old outages, and what the root causes are and what we may need to be doing to have workarounds, etc. So this helps me a lot to look at these things and to get a good overview. And the thing is as well is that it's not just Power BI. Usually it's a whole ecosystem of different things that are located in our products, in our data, in our architecture. So we have to look at Azure status diagrams as well, meaning there are different things that can be running. There are different regions we could have these services running in. So we have to make sure that we can get an overview of these as well. So Azure status is what helps me to do this. But most importantly, for me personally, is the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, because this is tailored to my specific tenant. And tailored to my specific tenant, I can have the overview of all the different things that I have inside of my tenant, what the issues were. It shows me a history log as well of things that have been there, things that are still currently ongoing, to make sure that I can get that overview. That's what makes it really important for me to get that overview as well. But let me briefly show a few of these to you as well. So if all is well, there's my browser. I have this Power BI support page. So it is just simply powerbi.microsoft.com/support, and it gives you the overview that I just discussed with you as well. It is nothing too fancy about this. It is just browse to the site and make sure you get there as well. Really easy, because it does give you that overview that we really want to be using as well. Other than that, I have the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. So if I just log into admin.microsoft.com, make sure that I'm logged into my credentials, I get over to the home page, and then I want to make sure that I can get to my health page, because that's the one that I actually want to be seen. So health and then service health which means that I can actually look at all the different components that I have inside of my tenant that are currently ongoing and all the different statuses that they have. So for instance, right now, I potentially have one potential minor issue with SharePoint Online that I may need to be looking at as well, because potentially my users are storing data on SharePoint Online, and potentially it could be something that can impact my Power BI users. So two simple things to just exclude some issues when you need to go looking into things. But there are, of course, multiple things that we do need to keep in mind when we're looking at this Power BI tenant administration. So for me, the activity log is the key, is the center to pretty much all I do when it comes down to tenant administration and when I need to make decisions on certain artifacts, on certain settings, etc. The activity log is the basis for everything that I need to make these decisions on. The activity log was introduced in December 2019 as an alternative to the Office 365 audit log. The main reason why this was called into life is that the Office 365 audit log required to have at least viewer privileges or something higher on the Exchange Online Security and Compliance Center, which potentially gave some big issues in organizations where it wasn't always useful, it wasn't always possible to get these privileges assigned, which meant that you couldn't actually exclude and couldn't actually gather these data to get the view of your activity and the view of your tenant that you need to have. So the activity log retains the data for about 30 days, and it only requires us to have the Power BI admin privileges, meaning that we don't have any relations necessary to other roles inside of Office 365. But if we happen to have the global admin privileges in Office 365, then we can get this as well. And as I keep telling, it is the key to many questions that we have, because it gives us an overview of pretty much everything that has been happening inside of our Power BI tenant. So to show you briefly what you need to be doing this, because I'm a strong believer in extracting this information and storing it somewhere a bit more permanent, a bit more persistent. Because of the fact that this activity log only has 30 days of history, you want to get it as early as possible to make sure that you build up as much history as you possibly can. So there are many options to doing this. The option I'm using right now is an option with PowerShell and storing CSVs on a local drive and then pumping over these CSVs to a database solution. So as I mentioned, right now, for me, it is PowerShell that I'm using. And it boils down to the fact that we need to have the PowerShell, the Power BI management commandlets installed in there to make sure that we have these, and then we can get cracking. We can get started with this. So usually what I do is I use a service principal through an app registration to register. The thing is that I'm just keeping it simple for this one, because I have already logged in to my Power BI service account, but it is as simple as just executing this little command. Then I'm making sure that I enter the right credentials. Because as soon as I have done this, I can get the information that I need on everything that is in here. So for instance, right now I need to extract the Power BI activity log. So it actually boils down to something as simple as this. It is get Power BI activity event. And that is it. The only thing is, it does require 2 parameters at least, meaning it requires you to give a start date and an end date, because it only can give you a limited set of records to return. And it does require you to give this date in a specific date format. So year, month, date, and then the hours, the minute, and the seconds as well in the time zone format. So as soon as I have that, I can start getting this information out of there. So it is as simple as just executing this one line of code as soon as I have these things. The thing is, I want to take it a bit further, and what I want to do is actually also do some select queries on this, on the records that I've just exported, to make sure that I can always have a proper selection. Because when I'm doing SQL queries, for instance, on a SQL server, I'm also not going to do a select star. So for that exact reason, this is why I'm doing this right now. So for instance, if I were to execute this, and to give you some basic information as well, what I'm doing here, what I have here is actually just a max value and a min value. So for this amount of dates, actually start looping over these dates to start doing this. Right now, I'm just keeping it on a simple one date to not have to wait overly long on these results to start popping out. This means that right now it's going to contact that activity log and it's going to start exporting all this information for me. So it's giving me a lot of information, and I've deliberately chosen to not actually go ahead and start exporting this to a CSV file, because I want you to see what is actually happening in here as well. So right now it is just a simple view report, but potentially there could be a lot of different things in here with people updating apps or people potentially doing stuff with tenant switches, with tenant settings. It is a lot of different information in here that is key to everything that we do. And as I mentioned, as soon as we export this information, we have it gathered somewhere. That is where we can start doing our actual analysis on top of these. But there is actually something more that I want you to extract as well. And it is something that I like to call an artifact inventory. An artifact is what I call a Power BI data set, a report, a dashboard, a data source, everything that is usable as an object inside of Power BI. We can also get out the data for that. We can get the information for this as well, which means that if we start extracting this, we can actually build ourselves a proper star schema model for this. So most of these artifacts can be extracted through those same APIs, through PowerShell as well. And it allows us to track these details about these heavily used artifacts. So if we have reports that get used an insane amount of time, as opposed to the others, we can actually go ahead and track them a bit more closely. Or if we have some private financial information in reports, that is also something that we can track more intensely to make sure that there is nothing bad happening to that data. I'm of the opinion that the admin APIs are specifically our friend, because they allow us to get the data out of there in the most efficient way possible, and also that we need to be authenticating through service principal, because in the future this will be the main way to start doing automation on top of these different types of scripts. So again, I'm referencing Melissa Coates because she made a lovely diagram of this, and she states this as a typical Power BI auditing solution. The thing is that in the wild, this is a very elaborate Power BI auditing solution, because what I usually see is that people have effectively started to export these activity logs. Okay, then most of the time they actually did get the workspace inventory and the artifacts out of there as well. But then it gets, the further down we go to the right-hand side of the overview, the less I actually see it come into play, which is a shame, because this truly allows us to have a very, very elaborate and a very, very interesting solution, a very interesting auditing solution as an answer to most of the questions we have. And as well, it is a case of just starting to track and starting to store these different things in there to make sure that we can actually answer to some certain auditing questions that we may have, but also potentially serve up this data to workspace owners, people that own a workspace with several reports in there, with several data sets in there, and serve up this data based on row level security to make sure that they can actually use this data for themselves. So potentially this could be really interesting as well. So for the interest of time, I'm going to skip the demo, but I am going to make sure that my scripts get up to a GitHub repo sometime soon, and that I actually do some supporting blog posts for these as well. But I do want to make sure that I finish in time to allow the next speaker to get prepared as well. So next to the artifacts, next to the activity log, it boils down to the tenant settings, the way we configure our tenant, the way we allow people to use our tenant efficiently. So most of these tenant settings we can use to control behavior, meaning we can allow or disallow something. The thing is, right now, it is really hard to document the way, well, it is really hard to track changes on these tenant settings. So I do highly advise everyone, every tenant, every organization to actually document their settings, why they have set something to setting XYZ with people 1, 2, 3 that can do this, and or why they haven't done this, with specific reasons for this, with their decision, with their drivers for the decision. Because right now, the only way that you can actually get notified if someone has changed a tenant setting is either through the activity log, and that just shows you that a tenant switch has been changed. It doesn't show you which one. It only says this has been switched. And the other option is through the Cloud App Security Center, but this also comes with additional licensing incurred. It takes I think the E3 or the E5 security licenses as well, which are potentially a blocker for budget in an organization, etc. But this does give you an elaborate overview of this user this time has changed this setting, the former setting was this, and the next setting that is currently set is this. So it is a really interesting thing as well. Most of these settings can be scoped, meaning it is a matter of enabling and disabling, but you can also do includes or excludes. So if we disable a setting, for instance, publish to web, disable it for the entire organization, except for a list of these people that can actually do this. Most of these tenant settings, if not all of these tenant settings, require a security group to actually scope these settings, meaning we can use Active Directory, so the on-premises version of security groups, or we can look at the online Azure Office 365 mail-enabled security groups. These work actually the best because they have the widest area of where they can be used. So I've included a very useful link by Gilbert Gevrouillet, who is a New Zealand MVP, and he actually made this useful little matrix of what type of security group we can use where in Power BI. And overall, across the board, mail-enabled security groups work on most of the places that we want them to be working. So that is why I recommend to start using mail-enabled security groups. What I do want you to do is, in your organization, go through every one of these different settings of the tenant settings and decide, our organization, we will allow them, we will disable them. But special attention needs to be paid to the way the workspace settings are set, the way that things can be exported and shared, and what we can do with Power BI visuals. So let me dive straight into what I actually mean with this. So I have, let me just show you where I'm going with this. I have a Power BI tenant. So no, I don't want to give feedback right now. I have a Power BI tenant, and this has admin privileges. This means that I can go over to settings and then the admin portal and make sure that I can find the admin portal where I need to be. So I have my tenant settings, and that is actually where I want to be. So my tenant settings is what I need to be doing right now. So as I mentioned, the workspace settings are a crucial one to start monitoring. And why is this? Well, by default, everyone can create a new workspace in the organization, which means that everyone can create a workspace and everyone can be admin of that workspace. So why is this a big deal? Well, potentially, if you leave this unchecked, you can get an uncontrolled growth of workspaces that no longer get used after 3 weeks in the organization. But also, since premium per user was announced, this actually also means that people can start assigning their content, their workspaces, to premium per user without you necessarily knowing it. And right now it's free and it's all fun, it's all dandy. But as of April 2nd, premium per user will become also a paid feature, which means that potentially we could get some surprises. And that as well is block classic workspace creation, because at the beginning of time, Power BI created Office 365 groups in the backend, which meant that every single time an Office 365 group or a Teams was created, we also had Power BI workspaces, which was something that we wanted for some of these cases, but not for everyone. So the account that I actually do my work on has about 125 workspaces, where I actually use 3 of them, because the rest is just Teams channels and Office 365 groups and SharePoint pages. The same thing is with export and sharing settings. A lot of these are enabled by default, and a lot of these will allow your users to export your data. And you as an admin or you as an organization need to decide how people can export your data. Meaning, do you allow people to export the raw data to Excel or to CSV files? Do you allow them to print reports? Can they export it to PowerPoints or PDFs, to Words? What can they do with this? Usually, people leave this largely enabled for everyone, but I also have seen organizations that do not allow this, that say Power BI is the main way for them to consume the content, and if they want to, they can use Analyze in Excel. It is something that I've seen out there in the wild as well. But another important one that I want to mention to you, and we're sinning against this ourselves, is Power BI custom visuals. So my advice to most of my clients, well, to pretty much all of my clients that I have, is to only allow certified visuals. Certified visuals meaning they have this little blue checkbox next to them in the app source, let's say Marketplace by Microsoft. This means that they've gone through a rigorous code auditing process, which meant that people from Microsoft have reviewed the code and are completely sure that doesn't contain any malicious code. Does that mean that a visual that is located on the app source and doesn't have a blue checkmark contains malicious code? No, the odds of that are fairly small. The main risk is when you have a user that found some random GitHub page somewhere on the internet, and they found a visual, or someone got a PBI viz file somewhere on a thumb drive. That's what concerns me more. So usually I only allow these certified visuals, and what I tell my clients to do then is go through organizational visuals and start building out a whitelist of non-certified visuals, meaning a whitelist where you as a tenant admin have reviewed, or as a team of tenant admins have reviewed the visual and make sure that it doesn't do anything funky that you don't actually trust for this. What do I mean by review? Well, what I usually do is I take a development environment, I take a development data set, something that doesn't have any value at all, and I start up a fiddler trace, so a web trace that actively tracks all the incoming and outgoing calls that are being done via web. Because it means that a custom visual can usually do web calls through Power BI as well. So I check the calls that are being made, I check whatever is being executed, and I check as far as I can see if there is anything funky happening on there. That's what I mean by review, because you're rarely going to get code from a Power BI custom visual. So as soon as you've done that, as soon as you deem it worthy for this to be allowed in your organization, well, what you can do is add it from the app source or add it from the file. My thing is, if it is in the app source, you want to make sure that you use it from the app source, because it will also automatically do the versioning on this as well. If a new version is released, they'll grab the new version as well. If you do it from a file, then you're the one in charge for making sure the file is updated. But the thing is, not everyone enables this by default. And let me get back to the slides. The thing is that not everyone allows this by default, meaning that you potentially have a lot of custom visuals in your organization that you're not aware of. Because at this point, there is no way to automate an inventory of what custom visuals are used in your organization. It's not possible. The only way that you can do it, potentially, is by getting every single PBIX file in your organization, scraping that, and making sure that you get the information out of there. But if you have a fairly large organization, that's going to take a long while. So the only way that you can actually do it is start inventorizing it, making sure that you reach out to people and say, hey, could you please let me know if you're using any custom visuals? And then at some point, make the switch. And as soon as you make the switch, you'll know which custom visuals are used in the organization. But I actually did the demo already, so I went over this because I want to tackle data access with you as well. Who can access my data? Who has access to the data that I have inside of my reports, my data sets, my data flows, etc.? Well, it is based on a few things. First and foremost, who has access to your workspace? Who has access to your workspace app, to the app that you have? Who has potentially gotten access to a report by manual reports sharing? Or who has gotten access through what your data set, to manually on your data set? Who has access on this, for instance? So workspace access is the most important one because they also influence a few other things. But the fact that people can access your data is also influenced by a row level security and object level security, which hit preview since February 2021. The thing is, what I wanted to mention about workspace access is that a workspace admin, a member or a contributor, has no RLS and no object level security applied to them, and they implicitly have build permissions. So let's just say that you have you have set up this elaborate scheme for row level security or object level security, it will not apply to them, simply because they can make the changes to the report itself. Well, if they can change it themselves, they can probably just change it and make sure that they are not included in that role. The same thing with build permissions. Is a build permission allows people to build a new data set or report on top of a data set, or use Analyze in Excel. If they have these build permissions, they can do with the data whatever they want. So I do encourage you to monitor your key assets closely. As I mentioned, HR data, finance data, whatever, make sure that it's closely monitored. The thing is as well is that an admin, a Power BI admin or a global Office 365 admin can get access to any new workspace and can therefore also give access to anyone else. Meaning, you don't give out Power BI admin roles willy-nilly inside of the organization. You need to be sure of the people that you're giving these permissions to, but that's pretty much the same thing with every types of admin privileges that you have. So know and trust the people that you have for these different permissions. And then the gateway is a crucial part in your organization as well. Meaning the gateway, to freshen up your mind, is the application that stands between the cloud services and your on-premises network. So if you have any SQL servers or analysis services cubes or some Oracle servers, and that data needs to be used inside of Power Apps, Power BI, Power Automate, Logic Apps, I think that's it. It will probably go through this data. So the gateway functions as a bridge between these two and services whatever requests that we might have. The thing is that we also have to make sure that users that need to publish new data sets need to be allowed on this gateway. The thing is as well is that by default, any user can install personal and on-premises data gateways in the organization, potentially opening up corporate data, because they may be doing it inside of the organization on data sets that you wouldn't necessarily want to be sharing to Power BI or not even share to other people as well. So I do encourage you to debate the policy for personal gateways, especially because in my opinion, personal gateways do not have a role in an organization, except for when we're using R data sources or Python data sources. Why is this? Because a personal gateway is usually installed on a local machine, and as soon as the machine gets shut down, the gateway will also not function. And the on-premises data gateway is intended to be installed on virtual machines or servers, etc., that will always stay up and running and can even be configured in a high availability mode or load balancing mode as well. So you can actually go ahead and go check out which data gateways you have in your organization. The thing is as well is, before I do get to that part, is that it's not necessarily only the way we restrict it, because usually you have some form of IT that governs the way software can be installed on your local networks as well, on your local machines. So it's the combination of these two that will restrict or allow the installation of these data gateways. But if I wanted to go to my data gateway overview, it is as simple as going to admin.powerplatform.microsoft.com, and I'm going to the data preview, which will give me by default an overview of all the different gateways that we have installed. The thing is that for a very long time within the organization that I'm showing right here, which is our own organization, we thought that we had 2 gateways running. And then we did this initial check a few years ago, and we actually saw that there were a lot more of these gateways that were being installed. The thing what we found out as well is that Power Apps in a Day, the day course, was very popular, and that we had a lot of people that installed data gateways to do their Power Apps in a Day. So there are a lot of gateways in here that actually weren't known to the system administration people. They didn't know these things existed. So that is why I say that by default, everyone can install a gateway, and it may not necessarily be a very good thing. The thing is, if you want to restrict this from within your organization, you can say manage gateway installers, restrict this, and then just say that this explicit list of people can actually install gateways. And I do recommend you to go do this, because otherwise, well, you'll end up with a list that's potentially even larger than this, and that may get out of hand. Why am I saying this is, well, Gateways, they open up your data, that's one thing, but gateways actually use a lot of resources. So when you're refreshing data sets, the gateways play a very crucial role, and the gateways will use more resources than you will actually know. Because, for instance, if we're doing something called query folding, and I'm not diving in too deep in this, it means that the gateway will handle a large part of the workload if query folding isn't functioning properly. So if you have this small little gateway device of 4 gigabytes of RAM and one CPU, this will probably cause your dataset refreshes to be very, very slow. And that is why exactly that you want your gateways to be in a managed environment, in an environment that people can actually know and trust to be performant, to handle these types of operations very well. But I did already show you the the gateway, the Power Platform Admin Center, and that is one of the main reasons, one of the main places where you can go do this. But you can also get this information through PowerShell commands. But I figured let's just show a user interface as well, because it doesn't all have to be PowerShell. So I do actually want to thread back on the topic of premium per user. And let there be no debate about this at all. I am a very big fan of premium per user. Premium per user means that you have a user-based license, $10 as an add-on to Power BI Pro, or $20 as a standalone license, and you get all the rich features that Power BI Premium has to offer, which is insane. The thing is that during the preview, after it was announced on September 2020, after Ignite, it was free for everyone to use. And that's when people went nuts for the premium per user preview, because they started building things that they couldn't previously do. They started building data flows with the enhanced compute engine. They started doing AI features, all these cool things, which is good because we want people to start using this as well. The thing is that by default, people can actually self-assign them an in-product trial experience or a Power BI Pro trial, and they could by default create their own workspaces. So potentially you have a large amount of premium per user workspaces in the organization with people building production grade workflows on this. So right now this is cool, but after April 2nd, this means that all trials that expire after April 2nd will require a paid license. So how sure are you that you don't have 150 users in the organization that will require a premium per user license, because they have built a lot of these things on top of this? And it's mainly for that reason that I wanted to dive into this myself as well, because I did actually have a client that had this specific question. So the only way that you can get an overview of people that can use premium per user and people that have done this is by getting out workspace information, capacity information, license information, and the activity log, and start correlating these things to each other, because that's the only way, that's the only actual way that you can get this data out of there and make sure that you can do something with it, something meaningful with this as well. But monitoring is it is a topic that you can spend a day on, if not at least. And there is a session by Dutch MVP Mark Lelyveld. He's built out, along with his colleagues, a end-to-end monitoring solution, meaning that it is a large setup with Azure Log Analytics, with blob storage, etc., where they built out this really cool, really complex monitoring solution, which is cool, but it doesn't have to be so complex, because you can actually do something with a few simple clicks as well. For instance, if you've extracted the activity log, as I've mentioned about 25 times already, you could actually do something as simple as set up a dashboard tile with a data alert on top of this, and then set up a simple count for these actions and say, I want to look at tenant settings, publish to web, trials, exporting data, deleting stuff, creating or editing data gateways, these things. And just have this as a very simple data alert on there. Is it your super duper monitoring solution? No, but this you can do in 5 minutes. And then at least you have something to move forward on. That said, I am running close out of time, and I want you to have some takeaways as well. The main thing is a Power BI admin should try to stay updated, and that's a really big challenge. I know how hard it is. So the main way you can stay updated is by following along with the Power BI roadmap, by making sure you follow the Power BI blogs, the Power Platform release waves, And then there is the community, which offer an insane amount of initiatives and an insane amount of information that gets released. The only thing that you need to keep in mind is check the release date. Because in this day and age, information changes and ages very quickly. So something that's been written 6 months ago may not necessarily be as relevant today because a new product was released, a new feature was there, or something was changed. Who knows? It is a very good thing to keep in mind as well. So if you're walking away from this and you're stepping into the office on Monday, look into automating the extraction process for the Power BI activity log. Scope some tenant settings for some of the key areas that I discussed, or some of the other areas that are inside of your organization. Go for some very simple alerting for these external failures or internal usage, and then make sure that you have some basic form of monitoring as well, that you actually know what is happening inside of your organization. But as well is, as I mentioned before in the beginning, it is not about restricting and disabling things. It is about enabling people to build awesome data stuff. So we really should be fostering that data culture in the organization. But if there is anything that I want you to keep in mind from this session is you can't know it all. Sometimes you simply have to Bing or Google. There's no shame in Googling things because not a single person can know every single thing. We all have to find out some things as well. So Google is perfectly fine, or Bing, or Ask Jeeves, whatever you use. So to close off, one small reminder that it is not about products. Self-service BI is not about products. Power BI alone is not going to enable self-service BI. Tableau alone is not going to do it. It is about the organization and the way that they have people, methodologies, and processes in place, and how they are well in sync with each other. Because if the people and the processes and the methodologies are there, they probably are going to be able to do self-service BI with any tool that's out there. The thing is that Power BI just helps us do this the best that we can actually do it. So in this deck, there are a bunch of references and resources that I used, and the deck is I've already given it to Simon, so you'll be receiving the resources shortly after the conference. There's a lot of things that you can look at. With that said, this was all that I have to share, and I do hope that you found it interesting. If there's any questions, I'll gladly take them as well. If you don't have any questions right now, but they pop up to you next week, these are my social handles, so you can find me on the social networks as well. And I do hope to meet you in person someday soon, because, well, let's just put it, I am dying to get out of my house as well, to be able to go out in public again.